It is June 29th, 1971, 200 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, in space. 3 cosmonauts experienced the last minutes of their lives. They spent 22 days on the space station Soyuz 1, the first space station in the world. But now their mission is over, and they are to return to Earth. The Soyuz 11 spacecraft decouples from the space station and sets off for re-entry into the atmosphere. They connect by radio with the ground station and discuss the weather data in the targeted landing area. Everything looks good. The braking rockets ignite as planned, but suddenly the cosmonauts do not send any more messages. Ground control hears nothing, and it becomes quiet around the crew. In between, the radio communication breaks off as planned, but even when the capsule comes back into radio range, the ground station receives no messages from the crew. 20 minutes later, at 11:16 p.m, the capsule makes a fully automatic landing 200 kilometers east of Desaux in Kazakhstan. When the recovery crew opens the hatch 2 minutes later, their worst fears come true. Cosmonauts Viktor Pasayev, Vladislav Volkov and Georgy Dobrovolsky are hanging lifeless in their seats. Resuscitation attempts remain unsuccessful. For the first time in the history of space travel, people have died in space. But what happened? How did the cosmonauts die? How many people have already died in space, and what are the laws that govern space? I am Tim, and I will answer these questions for you today. If you want to continue not missing anything about space, science news and our universe, then be sure to subscribe to this channel. Let's go! Fortunately, there have not been many accidents with spaceships in which people have died. As of now, a total of 19 people have died in space missions. The last major tragedy with human casualties occurred on February 1st, 2003, about 20 years ago. At exactly that time, the 7 crew members of the NASA space shuttle Columbia lost their lives. On the way back from a 2-week mission, the capsule broke apart 65 kilometers above the ground, and the remains of the space shuttle scattered across Texas and Louisiana in the United States. The cause? Already during the launch from Earth, a piece of insulation of the power tank had come loose, and when it fell down, caused a small damage on the left wing of the space shuttle. This can be seen in this shot of the Columbia launch. At this point, hot gases of 1800 degrees Celsius were able to enter the wing during re-entry into the atmosphere and damage it so badly that the whole spaceship became unstable. The occupants had only a very short time to react. Besides, 1 was not wearing a helmet and 3 were not wearing gloves. The pressure chamber decompressed and, unfortunately, no one survived. The crew did not die in space, but 65 kilometers above sea surface. But at what altitude does outer space begin? Well, there's not really a uniform definition of where outer space begins. And it's not easy to determine because our atmosphere doesn't just stop abruptly. It gets thinner and thinner with increasing altitude, and that's why most people agree to one number: 100 kilometers above sea surface, the Kármán line. From about here, the atmosphere is so thin that conventional wings or rotors are no longer sufficient to fly. So anything that is supposed to go that high or higher has to be built with technologies from space travel and not just function like an airplane or helicopter. If you follow this definition, the 3 Soviet cosmonauts from Soyuz 11 capsule are the first and only ones who ever died in space, because their accident happened another 100 kilometers above the Kármán line. The Columbia accident was 25 kilometers below it, and all other space accidents with fatalities were below the Kármán line. But before we look exactly at how the 3 cosmonauts died and what happened to them afterwards, let's answer another question. What are the protocols if a person should die in space, for example on a space station or a month-long journey to Mars? How would the body be disposed, and what are the laws in space? For such questions, the United Nations established the so-called Outer Space Treaty 60 years ago. Among other things, it states that the laws of the country that registered a spacecraft apply to it, and depending on what is required in this country after the death of a person, would then have to be implemented in space as well. Thus, completely similarly as on ships on the ocean. Either way, those who have died still have to be buried. In space, however, it is not so simple. You can't just dig a grave, but could you simply dump the body into outer space? No, that is actually forbidden. The United Nations has set up fairly strict rules on how we can keep Earth's orbit as clean as possible. That works extremely well so far. And such a dead body would at least be a collision risk for satellites. Therefore, a research group has developed a proposal on how to deal with the death of a crew member step by step. Because a corpse on board of a closed system, like a spaceship, is a contamination risk, and this method is called a body bag. Not bag, but body bag, back to Earth. The first thing that happens is that the body is exposed to the conditions of space in a kind of airtight sleeping bag for an hour. So in the process, the dead person is slowly freeze-dried. Then a machine shakes them for so long and so hard that the body disintegrates into dust. If this dust still contains residual moisture, it is dried with microwave radiation. This powder could then be stored relatively safely until the crew flies back to Earth. There, the family of the deceased person will receive the remains. But because there are still no official rules for crew member deaths, in case of doubt, the highest ranking person on board decides what should happen to the body. Until now, there was no need to establish such a rule, because all astronauts who died during space missions burned or exploded with their spacecraft. Except for the 3 cosmonauts of the Soyuz 11. And what happened to them we look at now. So, what happened to the crew of the Soyuz 11? The team on Earth did not know at first what had happened to the crew. However, they had not heard from the cosmonauts after some time, and that was actually planned differently. So something must have gone wrong. And indeed, when the braking rockets fired, a compensating valve opened. So the landing capsule lost all of its oxygen and the 3 occupants suffocated. The landing then proceeded fully automatic. When the recovery forces opened the capsule, any resuscitation attempts came too late. But Pasayev, Volkov and Dobrovolsky received a joint state funeral and were buried in a cemetery of honor in Moscow. And at the exact position where the Soyuz 11 spacecraft landed at that time, there's a monument today. So, if you die in space, you are buried according to the laws of the country that operates the spacecraft you are traveling with. Whether I'd like to be freeze-dried now personally by the body bag method and crushed into dust? I don't know, but it does raise some interesting questions. What will happen to the first humans that will die on the way to Mars or on Mars? Will the first spaceships going there then already have cremation and burial facilities on board? What do you think? Would you go to the moon or Mars if you got the chance? And if you die on the mission, how would you want to be buried? Drop it in the comments and feel free to leave a like if you enjoyed this video and want to support me. Until next time.